Well, hey there. Welcome back to another episode of Digging In. This is a segment that essentially is like a Bible study. We take a passage that we'll be looking at here at Sunny Slope in the next few days, and I kind of walk you through the first part of how to study the text. And the goal in this is really to help you learn some good practices for how to study the Bible on your own, but it also the point is also to help you gain some insight into a passage that we'll be looking at here to kind of help you prepare for a message. Now, we've been looking since the beginning of the year, we've been looking at the Psalms, and the focus so far has largely been on the Psalms that deal with God's purpose in creation, his purpose in creating us. Why are we here? How did God create us? Those sorts of questions. Well, now we're actually moving into the second part of this, which has to do with the problem of sin in the world. And how does that affect us? How do we experience it? What are the effects of that in the broader world? This is actually one of my favorite Psalms on that topic. And it's Psalm 32. And so what I'm going to do, I'm going to put it up on the screen and then we're going to kind of just walk through it together. And you'll be able to kind of see. And what we're doing here, what I think the first step that you take when you study a passage is you read through it prayerfully and thoughtfully. At this point, at that first point, you're really not looking to do any in-depth analysis. You're really just sort of prayerfully reading through a passage and asking that the Holy Spirit might help you hear the message that God has for you in His Word. But once you've done that, then it's time to really start to dig in. And what I think is always really helpful to do is to break the text down into a series of phrases. And the goal in doing this is really to identify the flow of thought in the entire psalm. You begin to notice maybe major sections within the psalm, and then you notice how different sentences or phrases or ideas all relate to one another. So we have the psalm in front of us, Psalm 32. We put that up here, and then we have this little ascription where it says a maskil of David. It's not entirely clear exactly what that is, but we know it's an ascription. It gives some direction on how the psalm might have been used. Then we start off, blessed is the one whose transgression is forgiven. Hebrew poetry is famous for parallelism, for basically stating the same idea twice, kind of back to back. And we see that here, and so our layout of the text can reflect that. So blessed, and then whose transgression and whose sin is covered and forgiven. So you can kind of see how those two ideas line up really well. And then we see the second phrase, the second sentence, blessed is the man against whom the Lord counts no iniquity, and in whose spirit, and again, we can kind of line these words up, there is no deceit. So when we see this, we see that it's against and in spirit, and then counts, and there is no deceit, no iniquity, no deceit. So we can kind of see, again, those ideas. Now, taken together, these two ideas are what we would call staircase parallelism. That's where, so each phrase, these each of these two phrases would be together just by themselves. They would be maybe what we would call synonymous parallelism. That's where you get the same idea just restated in a slightly different way. But when you stack up two of these um, lines of synonymous parallelism, what you get is sort of a building effect. So the first one, the first parallelism, the first little proverb there, blessed is the one whose transgression is forgiven, whose sin is covered. Then that's expanded on and it's built upon in the second line, against the Lord counts no iniquity, in whose spirit there's no deceit. And so you kind of you get the sense that you're going upstairs, you're developing an idea. It's more than just restating it in a similar way. For when I kept silent, my bones wasted away through my groaning all day long. We want to maybe kept silent and then wasted away. How did they waste away? Through the groaning is kind of how I look at that. I think that makes good sense. And now we get an explanatory phrase. For when I kept silent, for day and night. So we're kind of getting these repeated lines. For when I kept silent, for day and night, your hand was heavy upon me. And then you might say that idea is kind of repeated. My strength was dried up as by the heat of summer. The word as there is a sign that that's probably a simile, and so we're getting kind of imagery there and poetic language. That's not rocket science, right? That's pretty when you can kind of imagine the idea that the psalmist wants to bring to mind that our strength is it's like standing in the middle of a desert in the hottest day and it drains you, it saps your energy. And so the psalmist is applying that idea spiritually. I acknowledge my sin to you, and I did not cover my iniquity. So again, you're getting a kind of a parallel idea there. In a way, that might be what we call antithetical parallelism, where you get two ideas paired together and one is the opposite of the other. So acknowledging sin and not covering, those are two kind of somewhat opposite ideas, but they're really a way of saying the same thing. But rather than saying I acknowledge my sin and I was open about my iniquity, it's just using the language of opposites to make the point. I said, and then we got to say, well, what did he say? I will confess my transgressions to the Lord, and you forgave the iniquity of my sin. And we can, again, just line this up so we can kind of see transgression, sin, all kind of fits together. And then, by the way, the word Selah there, again, nobody knows precisely what that means, but it's probably a musical term. Maybe it indicates the end of one stanza. We found that over here as well. Therefore, now this is the word therefore is always an important word anywhere you come to it. I mean, in any literature, but in the Bible especially, because that's a cue to us that the psalmist is going to give us some sort of a conclusion, a logical conclusion from what has just been said. So because the Lord forgives when we confess, what do we do about that? Well, psalmist answers that for us. Therefore, let everyone who is godly offer prayer to you. And then it's qualified at a time when you may be found. So in other words, don't wait on this. Don't put this off. Do this today. Therefore, let everyone who is godly offer prayer to you at a time when you may be found. And then there's a promise attached to that. Surely in the rush of great waters, they shall not reach him. Now, I'm not sure what that means yet. Who's the they and who's the him? Well, we'll leave that for the next step. We're just going to kind of note that there's some language there, right? There's imagery, great waters. So that's trying to tell us something. We get a little bit further down. You are a hiding place for me. And then we get this series of you. You preserve me from trouble. You surround me with shouts of deliverance. And then our little Selah again. Um, and then it comes down. Now we switch. I will instruct you and teach again, instruct and teach you in the way you should go. I will counsel you with my eye upon you. So now the psalmist is speaking, the question is who? Who is this you? Who's he talking to? We don't know the answer to that yet. So we'll set that aside for the time being, but we want to tuck questions like that in our mind. We want to ask really good questions of the text, and that's one way that helps us get to the meaning. Be not like the horse or mule without understanding. And then, well, what do we know about the horse? Well, which must be curbed with bit and bridle, or it will not stay near you. Many are the sorrows of the wicked, but steadfast love surrounds the one who trusts in the Lord. So again, there's sort of this thoughtful call to response and a call to trust. Be glad in the Lord and rejoice, O righteous, and shout. Maybe we could do it this way. Be glad, rejoice, Shout for joy, all you who are upright in heart. So there we have it. Now, we haven't, of course, done nearly everything on this yet. All we've done is we've sort of broken the text down. We've just kind of laid out what does whoops. Um, we just kind of looked at what's the flow of thought? What are some of the people being addressed? What are the topics and the themes? It's gotten us off to a really good start, and we're going to pick it up shortly after the next step that we take. We begin to pay closer attention to some of the words and the images, and we try to just delve further into the text. So we'll see you. We'll pick it up here shortly. All right. Well, welcome back. We are here again, getting ready to do the second part of our Bible study of Psalm 32. First part, of course, we've just laid out the whole text. We've broken the passage down into individual phrases, and we've tried to pay attention to how do those phrases relate to each other? How does one phrase maybe expand upon or modify the one before it? Now what we're going to do is we're going to look at the different words. We're going to try to dig in so that we can understand more of the language of Psalm 32. So I'm going to put my screen up, and we're going to be able to see what we were looking at last time. That should be right on the screen in front of you. And we're going to dig right in. Now, one of the first things that I noticed when I started going through this is the word blessed here. It's repeated twice, and we've encountered that word a couple times now as we've gone through the Psalms. It's really a way of talking about true happiness, not superficial happiness or temporal happiness, but what does it really mean to experience the kind of deep, soul-satisfying happiness? And so the psalmist is tipping us off to the fact that this may be what we categorize as a wisdom psalm, a psalm that helps us to understand how to make sense of life and how to live a good and fulfilling life. And the key to that is found in the word forgiveness. Now, I'm going to highlight the word forgiveness here because it shows up at least a couple of different times down here as well. But then the question is, well, forgiven of what? And this is where, well, we actually, the answer in one way is simple. It's sin, which I'm going to highlight because it shows up at least a couple of different times here and here again. So there's at least a couple different times of that. But then there's also a sort of there are related words here, and I'm going to use the same color, but I'm going to put a square around them and then a circle around them, around transgression and iniquity, because you'll see that shows up again here. We have iniquity down here, and then we have transgressions and iniquity here. So the psalmist is clearly talking about, I mean, the simple point of it is that the psalmist is trying to show us the key to true happiness is dealing with our sin. It's when we're able to find a remedy to the problem of our sin. And the psalmist gives a couple of different explanation or descriptions for that, which we can maybe just briefly highlight here. It talks about God covering it and not counting no iniquity and no deceit. And so we're getting that sense that the psalmist is trying to emphasize how that God does something with our sin that allows us to experience true and genuine happiness. Now, as I was going through, by the way, here's another word that's repeated. I wanted to get this one too because I think it's important. We'll just highlight it a minute here. Because he talks about covering sin, and then it's down. I didn't cover my sin. The interesting thing is there's sort of a play on maybe not a play on words, but a kind of a play on idea. It says, "Blessed is the one whose transgression is forgiven, whose sin is covered." And then down here it says, "Well, I did not cover my iniquity." So, in other words, there's a way of trying to cover our iniquity or our sin that does not lead to happiness, and then there's a way of God covering our sins that actually does lead to happiness. That's kind of the idea. Now, let me show you something in this text that I think is really worth looking at, and that is that. Well, let's do it this way. I'm going to use a highlighter pen again, and I'm going to try to show you all of the different pronouns that the text uses, personal pronouns. So let's start with the word I. When I kept silent, and then my bones, my groaning, um, me, my strength. I acknowledged I did not cover my iniquity, my sin. I said, I will confess my transgressions, my sin. Therefore, okay, you are a hiding place for me. You preserve me from trouble. That's good start for now. Then let's go to the third person pronoun. Actually, let's go to the second person pronoun, which, of course, if you remember from high school grammar, is you. And so I'll just give you an example. For your hand was my strength was I acknowledge my sin to you. I did not cover. I said I will confess. You forgave. Um, offer a prayer to you at a time when you may be found. You are a hiding place. You preserve me from trouble. And then there's one more down there. The psalm, of course, goes on, but just I'm keeping it kind of focused on one screen for right now. Um, and then let's do third person, one more. That's a way of talking and referring to God. And so we let's see, we do. Oh wow, you could do. Um, there aren't as many of the third person, but there's one right there. Um, yeah, there's up here as well. Blessed is the man, that would count as well. Now, why do I do all of this? Well, because there's a question about this psalm, and the question is, um, who is the psalm written to and what is the purpose? This is not, contrary to what you might think, this is not a psalm that is actually focusing on, it's not an actual confession of sin. In other words, the psalmist is not himself naming and describing the sin that he's struggling with or that he's dealing with. What he's actually doing is he's appealing to other people and using his example as a way to tell them what to do. In other words, he's giving wisdom. This is a wisdom psalm in my judgment. So here's the first part. In the first part, this is really it's the focus is on the third person. So he's not, again, oh, here I missed one. I want to get it because I like to be thorough. Um, is the man in whose spirit blessed is the one. Um, so this is the first part of the psalm, the introduction, the first, it's two proverbs or it's two blessings. And it's focused on a third person and not a specific individual, but it's really saying this sort of person, this sort of individual experiences true blessing. Now, we go a little bit further into the next part of the psalm, and it helps us to see that now this is the I you language. And this goes on, I think, about to here. So we can say first, second pronoun. So this is the psalmist talking about his own experience in relation to God. He's saying, I did this, my bones, my groaning, my strength, my heavy. I acknowledge my sin to you. So the psalmist, that means the psalmist is addressing God. He's speaking about his own experience to God. But he's doing that as an example, and we know that because in the next part of the psalm down here, the psalmist uses the word therefore, which always indicates, or not always, but often indicates a conclusion or one thought that proceeds logically from a prior thought. So because all of this is true, the psalmist can say, this is what I want you to do. Therefore, let everyone who is godly, that's probably going to be another third person. We can count that as a third person uh, pronoun. Everyone who is godly. Oops, I think I got my colors wrong there because I think that should have been, yeah, third. No, I got it right. Everyone who is godly, offer a prayer to you. So the psalmist is speaking here. He's actually speaking he's making an appeal to a wide group of people. Um, but he's doing it in a way he's speaking to God, but the message is intended for a broader audience. And then so that's the first part of the psalm. This here indicates this is wisdom. We'll just say that wisdom. And then here this is the psalmist is giving his example. Now, let's go on just a little bit in the psalm. And to do that, I have to unfortunately clear all my drawings. Hate to do that, all that hard work. But now we're going to go up here and we're going to look at the second half of the psalm. Now, we're going to I forget which all colors I use, so it's not going to be consistent, but that's the way it goes. But let's start by looking let's start by looking at the I. I think I used maybe that. So I will confess you. Oh, we already covered that part. Um, so let's do. We can still highlight those me. I will instruct. I will counsel. You know, many of yeah. So there's now. Then we when we now we're going to get to the you to the second person. And let's do a light green for that. Therefore, letter to you at a time when you may be found. You are a hiding place. You preserve me. You surround me. I will instruct you. I will teach you. I will counsel you. Many of the steadfast be glad. Okay, so and then let's do the third person. Let's do references to, and we'll use maybe a bright green for that. Let everyone who is godly, him. You preserve me, sure. I will instruct you, teach. Oh, I forgot to got a couple of those. I can't let those slide by. So let's come back to you and you. There we go. Oh, while we're at it. Um, but then I also realized let's use, there we go. All right, so for let's do for the third person, let's do pink. Let everyone who is godly, oops, ha. There we go. All right, one day I'll get this all figured out. Okay, let's do third person. Let everyone who is godly, they shall not reach him. Um, Be not like a horse. Many are the sorrows of the wicked. That's sort of a third person, and then the same thing is the one who trusts in the Lord, O righteous, upright in heart. So there's these references to people who are categories of people. Now, if we look at again the pattern of who is the psalmist addressing. So here we already covered that. Here's where he comes to that conclusion. Therefore, let everyone who is godly trust in or offer prayer to you. So this is really it's first person to third. The psalmist is speaking. This is a little harder to tell, but really what he's doing is he's appealing. The psalmist himself is appealing to a broad group of people, and he's doing that by speaking to the Lord, but he's giving wisdom. He's explaining and expressing from his own experience his wisdom. Now, in this part here, I'm gonna. This is first. This is first and second person. Because what the psalmist is doing is he himself is addressing someone, and he's relating his own experience. Now, the question is, well, what is the someone? Is he speaking to an individual or is he speaking to God? This is pretty easy because typically, we talk the language of hiding place and you preserve me and surround me. That's characteristic of God. So this is a conversation, a first person, second person conversation. This is an I you conversation. It gets a little harder though over here because it's still a first and second person conversation. It's still an I and you, but the question now is who is the you and who is the I? Is this God speaking to the psalmist? Is this the psalmist speaking to God? Is this the psalmist speaking to an unnamed individual that he wants to instruct? Those are questions that you have to try to figure out. Um, and I think there's a couple options we can rule out, or at least one, and that is it doesn't seem like the psalmist is speaking to God here because I can't imagine the psalmist saying to God, let me instruct you in something, let me teach you. That just doesn't seem logical. So this part is probably the psalmist to God, but this part seems to be either God, now it's like the roles reversed, and now it's God speaking to the psalmist. Oh, somehow my thing got moved. That's not good. Um, I don't know exactly where this all was, but something like, I think it's something like that. Okay. Um, so the psalmist, it seems possible here that the psalmist that either God is speaking to the psalmist and saying, I will instruct you, but I actually think it's more likely that it's a first, second person, and it could be that this is second person plural, meaning that the psalmist is now speaking to a he's like a father speaking to a group of people, maybe a group of children, or he's a person speaking to a large range of people, and he's addressing them and giving them the wisdom of his own experience. And that would then make sense because he's saying, I will counsel you with my eye. Oh, we didn't highlight that my, but that's okay. We'll leave that for now. And then he's giving this wisdom and this and then that would continue really through the rest of the psalm where it's a first and second person, and it's a second person plural, and then it's also, concludes then with this idea of um the speaking, making the appeal to the group of people to find their joy in God because God is the one who deals with our sin. So I think this is really first and second, and it's first and third. There's some of that in here too, because he's saying, "O you righteous and O you upright in heart." Those are both third person categories. That functions as a noun, a collective noun of the people. Same thing here, the wicked and the one who trusts in the Lord. That's really a kind of a generic third person way of speaking about a broad range of people. So, what does all of that mean? Well, I think we can draw a couple of conclusions. The first is this. Number one, this is a wisdom psalm. This is a psalm that the psalmist is describing from his own experience, how he has found to deal with the problem of sin in order to experience and to enjoy the sort of blessed life that God intends for his people. So the psalmist is telling from experience, listen, this is what I have found to be true, and I want you to know this as well. So that's I think the first thing. The second thing, of course, that the psalm is showing us is indeed what is straightforward, and that is that the psalmist wants us to know what do we do with our sin and our guilt? And it turns out, I think this is a pretty big factor, a pretty big problem in our world today, because um, there are so many of us, we don't deal with guilt very well. Just think for a moment of when you get into an argument with someone that you care about, maybe your husband or your wife, or when you're at work and you get called out on the carpet for something. We tend to get defensive, we tend to blame other people, we deflect, we do all kinds of other things. And really what we're trying to do at a very base level is we're trying to deal with our own guilt. And the psalmist says, don't do that. That's not going to be productive. It's not going to lead to flourishing in your relationships. Instead, listen to what I have found to be true. Because he even says, I've tried it that way. I've tried to deal with guilt on my own. It didn't work. Let me show you what I found. So we're going to dig further into this. We've kind of laid out a basic framework, a basic sense of what the psalm is about. Now it's time to dig further into the text. We do that by exploring some of the different words. We try to unpack some of the imagery that's used, and in the process, we hopefully discover what God is wanting to say to us in His Word. Thanks for watching this episode of Digging In, and I hope you'll join us for our service on March 9 when we get to hear the message of this text.